thanks for being here today. And we're going to move into the sort of interview and the body of the event now. And I want to talk to, first of all, Andrew Brown from the GLAA. Andy, thanks for being here today. You can unmute and speak if you want to. So we're going to look at first this what happened at the very beginning in terms of the raid and the rescue of Chris. But first of all, I wonder, Andy, if you could just give us what is the role of the GLAA and what does a normal week, if there is such a thing as a normal week, what does it look like for you?
Good morning, everyone. Well, we have a tagline. We work in partnership to protect vulnerable and exploited workers. We were brought into existence in 2005 after the death of the 23 Chinese cockle pickers in Morecambe Bay the year before. We brought a licensing system in for people and businesses who want to supply permanent or temporary workers into some sectors within the UK labour market, processing and packaging of food, agriculture, horticulture and shellfish gathering. We have the license system is strictly under our licensing standards. It's an annual license, a full inspection before a license is granted. In 2016, under the Immigration Act, a post was created, which is what I am, a labour abuse prevention officer. Under 114B of the PACE Act, we were given police powers to investigate multitude of offences across all the labour market. That including our gangmaster licensing offences, Section 1 and 2 of the Modern Slavery Act, Employment Agency Act, and the Minimum Wage Act. A normal week, now there's a good question. For the last 30 odd years, I've been trying to work out what a normal week is. It's probably best to say, I give you a list, and certainly not exhaustive of what, on the background of where we come from as a criminal investigator. We're field based. That is, I have an office at home. We travel a lot. We have 4 syndicates within the UK and the Northwest, which covers the Northwest, as we all know, but also North Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. That encompasses some more issues regarding legislation, but I won't go into that at the moment. It's take far too long. So, we have an individual workload. We have an SIO, offences ranging from minimum wage to modern slavery. A typical day and week, we'll be attending operations locally plus nationally and internationally. With victim identification, tracing national and international victims to speak to them. AB interviews of victims, putting case files together in preparation of some cases, prevention visits, intelligence gathering and development. I can't really answer a normal week. It's what comes in, what I can add to what Evan is doing. But yeah, it's busy.
It sounds very busy. What's the bit of your job that you enjoy the most?
I've got to say, I for my background in police, I've dealt with a multitude of things. With the job I'm doing now, I have a concentration on vulnerable workers of all levels of exploitation, and that having that human contact and that seeing a case from day one to never ending in a lot of cases, it will go on until we don't see each other again. Well, that contact is what makes this job both very satisfying and enjoyable. Yeah, that's about it, really.
Yeah, about it. I think that resonates across the board. That it's that human contact. It's being able to help an individual that ultimately, in all my work with the GLAA, that's one of the core cultural values that you guys carry. And you rescue thousands and thousands of victims every year. And running through the core of your culture is that we care about these individuals and we want the best for them. So just talk to us. What happened in the lead up to Chris's discovery that made you, as an organisation, decide to act? So what was it that led up to you acting?
Police had received an anonymous call, which detailed some background around Chris's conditions and how he's being treated. The police ran with it for a while. I think there were 3 visits to the site where Chris lived. and it was referred to the minimum wage team at HMRC. The contact I have there contacted me. I saw it, contacted my SIO, and that's where we picked her up.
And what happened next? Like, what was, when you picked that up? What did that look like? What did you do?
Well, what we call a single strand piece of intelligence. Obviously, we would like to try to contact an on-caller. I can't go into anything regarding that, but we were starting with, well, where is he now? Is this current? So we start looking at the priorities, obviously the well-being of Chris. We did look at covert activity, very difficult from the actual site location. And it's again a weighing up of the time you would spend with covert action against the well-being and level of harm that Chris could have been under. So we just try to start a picture and try and corroborate what we know has been said in a single strand.
And you were able to do that, and then that resulted in what was your next action?
Well, then it was decided that the information we got, we corroborated from sources. A lot of hard work tracing people, because as most people on this webinar would realise, that Chris's life was it was invisible. If you're from the state looking downwards, he was invisible. Very unusual, and a case I've never encountered before. So we really had to start tracing backwards decades to find contacts, associates, family members. And as we did, we got little snippets from everybody that again corroborated the initial intelligence that we received, and we moved it from there.
So can you describe that first moment that you actually came face to face, you met Chris?
Yeah. We arrived after the operational planning. We arrived on the site. It's a traveller's site in Cumbria, fairly remote, and the actual plot where Peter Swell Senior's lived was a semi-permanent, a lodge, static really, quite large, a large amount of outbuildings around it, one of them being the shed. So we arrived, bearing in mind at this point we weren't fully aware exactly where Chris was. It hadn't been identified with the police visits where he actually lived. So we were literally visiting all the buildings we could, and we were an NCA staff who were brilliant, especially trained NCA staff, absolutely brilliant. We were literally stood outside the shed when the shed door opened and Chris came out. Two things that, again, I always try: professional and personal. Professional, well-being, medical, make sure he's okay. Capture what we saw, capture everything for later on down the line. Personally, it was just a bit of an overwhelming feeling of despair, really. And I've seen lots of things. It's just that stood nose to nose with somebody who doesn't, is 50 odd years old and doesn't exist effectively, living in the conditions that we saw, and it was just an overwhelming feeling of despair that somebody has got to that stage, somebody will want to get somebody to that stage, and nobody knew about him. Why didn't anybody know about what Chris was living in and what he's doing? That was there were my two feelings, personally, professionally and personally.
Thanks, Andy. I want to just bring Kyle in at this point and say, Kyle, obviously after Chris's, Andy's met Chris and removed Chris from that situation, he came to a safe house with City Heart. So what was it like for you, Kyle, meeting Chris for the first time, and what were some of the initial things that you helped him with?
I think meeting Chris for the first time was really sad, if I'm honest. I mean, it's always sad if I'm meeting any people that come to our safe house, but it was really sad. I mean, there was the unique situation of when he arrived at the safe house, the guys were watching the TV and there was his story on the news, which was a bizarre situation for him to be in. And he was, it was like a deer in headlights. He just didn't really know what was going on. He was a little bit out of it, to put it bluntly. And initially, you know, when he came to us, he pretty much just had the clothes that he was wearing. I think he did have a bag of clothes with him, but, you know, very quickly we realised that they were not usable. He desperately needed help with his hygiene. So the first day he was with us, we helped him, you know, and how to wash properly and how to use a shower and things like that. And then it was just about getting him to settle and helping him to relax and helping him to realize, you know, we were here to help. And also just to kind of help him realize the severity of the things he'd been through, I guess, as well. Yeah.
What was his kind of understanding of what had happened and where he was, and was that a journey of him understanding that, or?
It kind of came in several parts. I think it very quickly, it was clear he understood, you know, where he'd been living was not okay. How he'd been treated with work and how he'd been used for that was not okay. But I think there was also the added wrinkle of he'd known these people for so long, they were essentially, he would refer to them as family, essentially, which was a very bizarre situation to be in. And that took a bit longer to kind of journey through and kind of unravel in him. I think the first Christmas he was with us, he was asking if he could go back and have Christmas with them, which was quite heartbreaking and quite kind of tough to manage and journey through. But I think very quickly he realised, you know, how he'd grown up and how he'd been treated for the past 40 years is not normal, and very, you know, really not okay.
So what was you and your team, what was the focus of your support to Chris then?
For the first few weeks, and well, for the entire time, but for definitely the first few weeks, we realized that he didn't know how to do pretty much most things that we take for granted. You know, we always provide mobile phones to people coming to us. He didn't know really what a mobile phone was and how to use it, so we had to show him how to do that. He didn't know how to cook, so we taught him how to cook. We taught him how to clean, how to use washing machines, white goods, things like that. And then the focus kind of shifted a little bit from that. I mean, that was pretty much an ongoing thing we did, if I'm honest. But it soon became apparent that, you know, there was some additional needs there as well, and some issues around Chris's communication ability. We realised he couldn't read, and while he did have an understanding of money, he couldn't really count as such. So that's where we got adult services involved at that point in time. And helped him to get assessed. He got an OT through that, and you know, and he got his we got help with how to communicate with him, and how to help with teaching him how to read, teaching him how to write, things like that. Yeah, that was like the first, I'd say, year of him with us was that was the square focus of what we were doing. We were
that was the sort of first year. He was with for how many years in total?
A little under 3.
So how did the support change over that period? You described the first year, but what were some of the changes in the support that he received?
Once we kind of got to this place where he started to be able to read, started to be able to write, you know, I never forget the day he learned how to kind of sign his own name. It was it's such an achievement for him, and it was an amazing day. But he got more and more confident. So the next step was to kind of start thinking, you know, long term, like where does he go from here? Where he can't stay with us forever. So how do we help support him into that? So we got him access to some courses. So he attended a college in the local area that put on a catered course for victims of modern slavery, for life skills and things like that. Oh, sorry, someone's at the door. He attended college. He took part in drop-ins that we host that have activities for our survivors, and he learned things about different cultures and things like that. It was just about creating confidence as best we could in him. Aside from that, you know, working with the adult services as well to kind of get supported living, because clearly, you know, he wouldn't be able to kind of move on and live independently without support on some level. So that was kind of the second half of his time with us, was focusing on that as well.
Wow, incredible. And like 3 years of support, and I know the support is ongoing as well, although light touch, but just incredible, Kyle. Just want to, I'm sure on behalf of everybody on the call, just incredible support, and thank you for your commitment to that journey, that ongoing journey of his recovery and integration. I want to come back to Andy, because Andy, once you knew that that Chris was safe, what were your next steps?
Well, on the day when Chris was taken to safe place by the NCA, we were on site. We would do what normal investigation is. We arrested Peter Swales Senior. Search phase started with the plot. We've kept full house to house of all the surrounding buildings, we did it twice. We did it on the day and we came back at a later date. Again, negative. Literally nobody would speak to us about anything to do with Chris and Peter Swales. Full video photo capture the complete site. We secured a lot of exhibits, and we eventually interviewed Peter Swales Senior eventually. I think it's important to start with investigation-wise, evidence-wise with this case. If you look at it in general, is that we must remember that and I've learned this from my time in the JLA, is that the living conditions and the conditions we found Chris living in is the start of the investigation and not the end of the investigation. It's a very good indicator, and it's absolutely disgraceful. But when it gets further down the line towards judicial and prosecution, we have to professionally move away from it and treat it as an indicator, and it's the start of an investigation. Again, I think I said earlier on is that he was invisible. Chris he'd got an NI number, but automatically when he was 16 through the state, no benefits ever claimed, no GP for decades. Lost contact with his family, lost contact with his friends. The only associates he'd had or thought he had was probably on a night if he went to the pub down in Cumbria. And so we started fairly blindly, but very quickly began to realise that we're going to have to widen it further. So we went to landlord, we went to spoke to associates. They gave some brilliant accounts of his vulnerability. No clothing, never any money. Walks from the site to the pub. Doesn't seem to eat at the site. He always brings some crisps and pop with him to the pub to eat. They were worried for him. Again, people think, well, why didn't anybody say anything? That's something I can't answer, but it was certainly significant in this case, and in many cases. Those people see it, but don't tell anybody about it. We had to try and find out where he was Was he working? What was he being made to do? Through some digital devices we seized and some analyse of it, we found that Peter Swales and several of his companies connected to him, who do a lot of farm work and housing work, roofing work. They were on an online site, tradesman site. We contacted them and we got over 600 interactions between Swales associated companies and customers. So we had nowhere to start. That was the starting point. So I think we traced 450 of them. Ones that were still alive, ones that were still telephone numbers. A lot of them spoke to us, and we took a large number of statements. Again, some were 10, 20 years previously, but it's still stuck in the mind about Chris. One of them says he was working on the roof all the time. Nobody else did. He did all the hard work. He was dishevelled, never spoke to anybody. One person even said he asked me whether I could have some trousers, and this is a worker working on the customer's house. Now, all the way through that point, nobody said anything. Nothing was reported. It's only 40 years afterwards when he opens the door to ourselves and say that it comes to light. So it was very challenging, but we did a lot of work and corroborated all the intelligence around what was initially said to us.
That's an incredible amount of work going into gathering the evidence and investigating. You touched on some of the things that Chris was forced to do or coerced to do during his time as a slave. Could you just talk a bit more about some of the things that that he was made to do or coerced to do during that 40 years?
I think when he first came under the control and coercion of Mr. Swales, it was initially as a young teenager to look after horses, odd jobs. It then went on to a bit of road work, but then majority was working on houses, roofing, farmyard, outhouses, painting, rough work, hard work, all seasons, and high work. And we managed to get for some witnesses some photographs, because a lot of complaints came in from the work done by Mr. Swales regarding the standard. So photographs were taken by the customers. So we managed to get hold of some of these customers, get hold of the photographs, and it shows Chris on roofs a lot. And when I say on roofs, I mean a 30-foot high ladder with him on the roof, and that was it. We got HSC involved, and an expert would give some great evidence around the working conditions and what he would have been exposed to on a daily basis. I mean, I think it was 2013. He fell off a roof and severely injured his back and went to hospital. One of the first. There's a long timeline of hospital interactions that we gathered eventually, but this was the one that stuck in my mind. And I think he was in whatever time he was in hospital, and then he says in one of his accounts he just went back to his shed. There was no other interactions afterwards. It was people say, "Oh, he's just working on a railway, he's just working painting," but every day he worked, he was at risk.
Yeah, gosh.
And we mustn't forget that. It trivializes it by saying, "Oh, he's just working on it," but he wasn't. He was at risk every day.
Wow. And I mean, you mentioned some of those challenges of gathering that evidence and trying to put that case together. Were there any other challenges that you faced to bring the case to trial?
The first one I've touched on, very historic, but on the same level happening on the day that we got there. So that was challenges in itself. A lot of unwillingness to speak to us because of the situation and where it was. A lot of the stuff that we got was from Chris himself, and I don't have any words for Chris really. He's a true survivor, and Carl will speak a lot more about it than me, but it's just but a lot came from Chris, and that's down to my first thought was, do we have a victimless prosecution against Chris giving evidence with his vulnerabilities? And we were lucky to use, first time in modern slavery, the Section 28 of the Youth and Justice Criminal Evidence Act, where his cross-examination of his evidence in chief can be pre-recorded, so he doesn't have to attend trial, which I think helped immensely. And for City Hearts, the intermediary, and for Gary Scott, our victim liaison officer, on that day, Carl will know, on that day it was difficult for Chris, very difficult. There's always that balance of re-victimization, but he was brilliant. So that was a massive challenge. Bringing it to prosecution, I think it's a fairly new legislation, 2015. It brings its challenges with lack of really clear case law. There are some RV Connors, RV Rooney, but and the Palermo, it's very narrow, and it's difficult to get to the threshold to get to a prosecution. So we need more modern slavery prosecutions. I think we need some more movement around the legislation. But yeah, it was challenging.
And I guess, I mean,
on lots of levels.
Everybody on the call will know about the sentencing. I wanted to give you, I mean, how did you feel about that sentencing and the result there?
I've been to Crown Court many times and been involved in lots of sentences, and in some ways I've had good result with a sentence, but I still don't feel I've really given something to the victim to help them going on. This case is totally different, absolutely different. Is that, yes, it's too lenient, and I know it's gone to Attorney General, and I'm confident that the Attorney General will then refer to the Court of Appeal. I just think it for lots of reasons, which I won't go into, I think it should go and it was unduly lenient. But this case is one where, taking the sentence out, it's the probably the only time in my career where I've been able to sit down and say, do you know what? He said, Chris, now, for my actions, GLA's actions, my wonderful partners, Kyle and City Arts and all the rest of the NGOs, and the help that we have in this sphere of investigation, he's now living a life he was denied for 40 years. And that, to me, is why I do the job and why everybody does it. But the sentence, yeah, unduly lenient, it's being looked at, and I'm confident it will go to the Court of Appeal.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think you touched there on a couple of things, but I think one of the things that we all care about is how is Chris doing now. And Kyle, I just wondered whether you could share a few thoughts on how he's doing, and what does he enjoy, what does he care about, and what's his life look like now?
I actually managed to see Chris last Friday, I think it was, if not the Friday before. Sorry, days have merged. And he's doing incredible. I can't really put into words without getting a bit choked up how proud I am of him. He is living in the swankiest, loveliest apartment you've ever seen, with some staff that work in the building who are the loveliest people, who understand modern slavery and understand what he's been through, which is so important. And in terms of what he enjoys, I mean, I've actually got a couple of quotes from Chris that he wanted me to share, so I'm going to share them. But he loves his football. You know, he's missed a ton of football, and most times at the safe house you'd find him on YouTube on the TV rewatching Euro 2002 or whatever it was, you know, stuff he'd missed and he loves. So if it's all right, I'll just share these quotes, right? These are amazing. So these are paraphrased just to kind of read better, I guess. But City Arts made me happy, and this meant I can build my life back up. I feel as good as I ever have before. I go out every day, and this makes me happy. City Arts helped me to go to college and pass my first ever course. They also helped me to read and write and to be able to buy my own clothes. I have a gardening job now at the allotment. It means like he volunteers at an allotment. I weed paths and help grow plants with some of the men. I have my own plot where I want to plant vegetables on. I'm getting on with everybody where I live, and people who look after me are really nice. I want to say thank you for the nice words, but I am glad it's all over and done with. So a lot of people sent in letters and kind words of encouragement, and that's what I met him for, to pass on. And I'm not ashamed to say I sobbed a little bit afterwards. It did really feel like a line had been drawn underneath everything for him, which is incredible.
Amazing. And I know, Carl, you've done incredible work, but you work as part of a team at City Hearts. So, I mean, how's this case impacted? Well, I guess you talked a bit about yourself, but how's it impacted the team?
I think to kind of mirror what Andrew said a little bit, I think Chris is such a horrific case, but it's also one of the unfortunately rare times, because it doesn't happen very often, where we get to see someone enter service and leave and kind of go on to live a normal life, if you like, start to finish. And it's just, I think there's two sides of that. Is that, you know, it's a lot of new staff that we have come in. We do talk about Chris to them because it's it shows not only does this happen in Britain to British people, it happens to men, and it's also a very good example of how, like Andrew said, 40 years and no one said anything. You know, no one. Hospital visits, doctors visits, how easy it is for people to go under the radar and just not get seen. But I think also it has shown how important it is working with partners and working with organisations that know about modern slavery. I mean, I can't speak highly enough of Gary Scott. Gary's an incredible guy, and I think his support mattered not only so much to me and my team, but also to Chris. You know, it's simple things such as he said he'd call every Monday, and he called every Monday for 3 years. And when he didn't, it was because he was taking a rare break, or as is the nature of his job, something had came up, and that meant the world. You know, the college we sent him to, the person who ran the course knew about modern slavery, and it meant that every step of the way he was helped by people who understood the situation, who understood where he'd come from, what he's going through, and it's been fantastic in a way. You know, it's obviously always sad when we have to look after people who've gone through what Chris has gone through, but to see where he's at now, it just makes it all worth it.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks again. I want to bring in Dame Sarah now. It's just great to have you with us, Dame Sarah. Just quickly, for people that may not know, what's the role and the purpose of the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner?
Before I do that, can I just make a couple of comments, because I have found that so powerful, and thank you both to Andy and Kyle. You know, the point you were just making, Kyle, about somebody who is really on the margins of our communities is so so powerful. I mean, we talk about slavery and trafficking being a hidden crime. This is, you know, a very clear explanation of why it is hidden, that people are, you know, they've fallen off the radar. They don't seem to kind of count in modern society. So that really struck me. But the second thing is, you know, well done. Congratulations to both you and Andy for your professionalism. You know, you have made a huge difference in somebody's lives, and you should take pride in that. And I know you're both pretty humble guys, but, you know, really, really thank you. But the other thing that struck me was these cases do rely on, you know, innovation and new ideas. So what it powerfully illustrates to me is that these cases are hard enough to bring to court as it is. They're complex, they're complicated, and we need people like yourself, Kyle, that City Heart's sort of intermediary role to make this happen, to give that support to the victims so they're able to give evidence. But it was also great to hear, and I was aware of this from months ago, that actually you were using Section 28 of a very old piece of legislation that had never been used for a modern slavery victim, so that Chris could give his evidence beforehand, and it's pre-recorded. And I think that's a really important development for vulnerable victims. So on all counts, well done. To answer your question, Phil, my role is to encourage good practice in dealing with modern slavery. And so there's lots of good practice in this case, as I hope I've just explained. I have a very small team. I have to set out my sort of plan to the Home Secretary, who lays it before Parliament, and I have to report every year as to what I've been up to. I have very few powers. The only kind of power I've got really is that public authorities such as the police or the GLAA or Border Force or local authorities are under a duty to cooperate with me. So that's my job, really about encouraging good practice, whether we're identifying victims, protecting them, investigating the offences, and importantly, actually thinking about how do we prevent this in the first place. And it seemed to me, and as you both described that case, oh my goodness, how many opportunities to prevent were missed over that 40 years. All those touch points with the state, with different organisations, where actually, if somebody had been a bit more aware, they might have raised the concern.
And that's really key point. Thank you for sharing that. Just how can, I mean, because you bring a UK-wide perspective to this conversation, you know, we've zoomed in. So could you just zoom us out a bit and just tell us how can the UK improve our fight against modern slavery? Because, you know, the figures came out yesterday that, you know, 12,000 people removed from slavery last year, up from 10,000 the year before. 77% of them males. Labour exploitation continues to be on the rise. How can we in the UK better fight modern slavery?
So you're absolutely right, Phil. I think it was 12,700 referrals for support, and actually 3,000 further potential victims are identified who didn't want the support. So 15,000 in 2021, you know, it's a substantial increase on the previous year. It's really important that we ensure that whether it's police officers or people in local authorities or people in Border Force or maybe even the prison service or in the military, that actually people who might come across victims know what to look for. So it's good that we're identifying more victims, but I think we could always do more to make sure that people know what to look out for. But I'm also really concerned about the longer term care for victims and survivors. And it's great to hear that Chris is living semi-independently and is by all counts, thriving after his awful experiences. And key to that is accommodation, training, education. And there are some really good examples. I know in City Hearts, you work with the co-op on the Bright Future scheme, trying to get people into work. Organisations such as Safely Hayes Foundation help to develop employability skills with survivors. And there's a variety of different educational opportunities, but it's still a little bit of a postcode lottery across the country about whether you get that sort of support. So a lot of what I've been doing is, how can we really help people to recover what we call their agency, to recover their independence, so they can live the sorts of lives that actually all of us probably take for granted. So that's been a really key area. And of course, if we do that, we reduce the risk that people will be re-trafficked. So that's about victims. In terms of prosecutions, fantastic that this case was prosecuted. Actually, the figures for last year are looking better than they have done for a few years, more prosecutions, but I still would want more, because there's a lot of people making a lot of money out of the misery and exploitation of their fellow human beings. So we need to do more on that, but we also need to think about how we prevent this from happening in the first place. Of course, businesses need to think about what's happening in their supply chains, but also there's a role for each one of us.
Well, what is that role, Dame Sarah? We've got over 100 people here at this event. So what can we do? How can we as the public, what's the best thing that we can do to help stamp this out?
Well, the first thing to do is make sure you know what are the sorts of signs that you should be looking out for. As I said earlier, there were opportunities to identify Chris as being vulnerable and maybe exploited, and they were missed. So what do we need to be looking for? That sense of people might be quite disheveled, they might maybe have somebody with them controlling them, they might not be they might not be confident around organisations, they might be quite fearful of people in authority. There's a variety of different resources which will tell you what the sorts of signs are. And if you just have the slightest concern, there's a modern slavery helpline. You can either go online or ring them up, or if you want to remain anonymous, if you're concerned, call Crime Stoppers. The number is readily available. So please make sure that you understand what to look for, and if you have concerns, report it. And the other aspect, and I was thinking that when you were talking about the work Chris did, doing tarmacking and roofing, if as consumers we're buying a service, whether that's a car wash or somebody tarmacking our drive, if the price is really cheap, I think we just need to think about, is that because it's based on somebody else being exploited? And just be kind of conscious and thoughtful consumers.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. We're so driven by the price, especially with the price of everything going up. It's going to become increasingly important that we do just care about that price point, especially for some of the labour that we're providing around our homes and houses. I think that's a really key point. And if people do have a concern, like you said, and people do have a niggle, I always say to people, your job is not to spot modern slavery. Your job is to spot a sign. And that sign may result in something or it may not, but don't get tied up in thinking, is it modern slavery? Isn't it? It's a sign. And if you share it with Crime Stoppers, or if you share it with the Modern Slavery Helpline, there are experts behind those lines, which will then assess that information, collate it with other information they're getting, maybe from social services, or like we've heard from Andy, multiple other sources, and then they will act on that information. But I'd encourage you not to get caught up on trying to spot slavery, but just spot the signs. And I think Paul, who's from the GLAA, has popped a nice, useful link in the chat there as well. I want to bring in, thanks so much, Dame Sarah, and I know you're staying on for a couple of questions as well. I want to bring in Ed, the CEO of City Hearts now. And Ed, thanks for being here with us today. Once a survivor has been found and freed, we've heard a lot about support, but how important is that ongoing support in terms of the recovery of an individual?
The answer is incredibly important, but I think to recognise just how important it is, I want to come back to just one of the words, because you talked there about kind of once someone's been found, a survivor, and freed, and I think it's very easy for us to live thinking that freedom is just what you're freed from. And so in this case, of very clearly, you know, for Chris, actually, you know, through the work of the GLAA, actually there was that moment where he was freed from, you know, his exploitative situation, from the shed, from the work that he was being forced to do day after day, week after week. So that was an incredibly powerful moment. But I think we have to recognise that actually survivors of modern slavery need freed from a whole lot more than that. So many survivors will arrive to City Hearts, to one of our safe houses, with addictions that are developed through no fault of their own in their trafficking situation. You know, some will be self-harming because actually that's one of the very few things that they are able to control in their lives. So we need to understand there's the freedom from, but I also think actually the freedom that you and I enjoy is far more powerful than just what we're freed from, and it's also what we're free to do. So at City Hearts, what we want to do most of all is to see people, you know, to support people long term on their recovery journey, so that they are, if you like, free to live. And I guess what I kind of mean by that a little bit is actually, you know, having that freedom to begin to kind of understand what's taken place to them, begin to come to terms with the trauma that they've experienced and how to manage the day-to-day impact that has on their lives, you know, free to integrate back into society and begin to question and find who they are again, because actually identity is completely crushed in situations of exploitation. And, you know, find people, as Dame Sarah's talked about, who are actually, you know, in a position and free to take up work and have a stable income and build a life, the stuff that I guess a lot of us just really take for granted, and that takes time. You know, that can't be achieved in a few weeks or months of support. Actually, it needs that consistent, that ongoing support to achieve that true freedom from, but also freedom to live.
So how can we make sure that, you know, survivors receive that support? Because, you know, we're hearing these horrific stories. You know, that support is so important, that somebody's life is not just sort of, you know, we do a little bit here and then they're on their own. No one should ever be left alone. No one should ever be left behind. And, you know, so how do we ensure that ongoing support is there for survivors?
I think there what we have to recognise as well is that actually there's some very basic needs that all survivors share, but actually also each survivor will need different support, because actually, you know, support needs to be holistic. It needs to be tailored, because the people we're supporting are so diverse, their needs are so diverse. But I think, to come back just for a moment, there's some very basic human needs that you and I need, but that particularly, especially survivors of modern slavery need. And so, you know, kind of, it's stuff like having someone who checks in on you. So for many of us, that might be a family member who just gives a call, or a friend, and who's, look, how are you doing? What's going on? What's happening? And kind of, we need that. And I know I need the times where, you know, something goes wrong and I need to be able to pick up the phone to my dad or to my wife and go, hey, help, like, what do I do here? And so City Hearts, a number of years ago, really identified that need for that ongoing support that's consistent, not intrusive, not involved, you know, kind of day by day, but actually, you know, phone calls month after month to check in, to see how people are, that kind of crisis helpline, if you like, that people can call at any moment when they hit crisis. And that is absolutely key, because without it, people are left vulnerable, and the risk or the likelihood of re-trafficking really increases. And so there's that need of phone calls, someone to check in, someone to be there, but also that need for community as well. And so part of the integration support program that we set up has those phone calls, but also has regular weekly drop-ins that people can attend. And that's all about just having a community, you know, that people need to thrive in, to enjoy. And as part of that, you know, there's there's activities, there's food, there's friends. I remember your words kind of from time ago, just saying, look, we want this to be the best day of someone's week when they come to one of our drop-ins. And then alongside all of that, we have the health and well-being interventions, because survivors and their needs are so diverse. And so that's what that programme is. And so just coming back to, well, how can we make sure of it? What I want to really enforce today is that this support is absolutely vital to people like Chris. And we're supporting over 200 people in the integration support programme at the moment. And that work quite literally, I think, kind of brings or delivers almost, you know, that long-term freedom that lasts. And I think what I do want to do today is to take the opportunity really to ask that if people are able to support this work for us, because City Hearts desperately needs this area of work funded. It costs us £200,000 to run the integration support programme every year. And so, you know, in the links today, in the chat, hey, you can give and donate to that work. But I think to come back to the question, how can we make sure of it? We can all play our part. And it's to recognise that we need to do that to make sure survivors receive the support that they need.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Thanks. I know Dame Sarah's got to leave fairly soon, so I wanted to move into some questions that have come in, if that's okay. And a question, Dame Sarah, that's come in to you: the Nationality and Borders Bill around potentially failing modern slavery victims, and a question here from somebody saying, what can be done to help?
I've got concerns about Part 5 of the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is all about modern slavery. In particular, it suggests that in certain cases where victims have a criminal past, that they won't be provided with the sort of support we've talked about today. But it also talks about in certain cases that potential victims will be given a notice and said, you must tell us about your modern slavery in a set period. And if you don't, that could undermine your credibility. I mean, the idea that you can disclose trauma to a deadline, I think, is a really, well, it misunderstands the nature of trauma. So I've raised the concerns, I've written about them in the media, I've written to the Home Secretary, I've given evidence. If you want to get involved, the bill is about to go to the report stage in the House of Lords. Well, it is at the report stage. Our bit goes to the report stage next week. If you go on to something like the Human Trafficking Foundation website, they are coordinating campaigning across the sector, and they have got suggestions for what you might send to your local member of parliament, raising concerns, because after the amendments in the Lords, of course, it will go back to the House of Commons. So look on the HTF website and you'll get some suggestions about what you can do if you want to get involved.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Perhaps someone can pop that link in the chat, Paul or Diane. I know you're there, for the Human Trafficking Foundation website. A question for you, Dame Sarah, before you have to go. Why do you think the sentencing was so lenient?
I have read the judge's comments, and he is at pains to suggest that given the limited nature of the plea, the acceptance of the plea, that he wasn't able to go further. Now, as Andy's pointed out, that's going to be challenged, but he does set out that Swales Jr., he pleaded guilty, but to quite a narrow involvement in the offence, and that was accepted by the Crown. That's a kind of a legal issue, and as I say, it will be examined, but if you want, it's publicly available. If you have a look, you can see why legally he felt that that was the only opportunity he had, in line with all the sentencing guidelines that exist. Okay, thank you. If you need to head off, you can do that now, Dame Sarah. Thank you so much for your involvement and everything you've shared here. And I know the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner will put your website in the chat as well, so people can go and look at all the research that you've done around many interesting and powerful topics. So thank you, Dame Sarah. Pleasure. Bye-bye. I want to come to Kyle and say there's a question here about Chris's sort of ongoing well-being. You know, will he have any significant long-term problems from this ordeal? I guess share what you feel you can, but is it, you know, is there any significant long-term kind of effects that he's dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, it's 40 years we're talking about the worth of trauma. Like, I'm not sure he will ever get past that in a way. However, I think I kind of wish you could all meet him. That's the difficult thing. When you do meet him, you'll see how much of a confident, lovely man he is. And to me, like, yeah, he will have long-term issues and he will have long-term struggles that he has to manage, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily impacting his quality of life anymore. I think obviously when he was with us, he did receive lots of counselling, ongoing counselling. Our counsellors felt like he didn't need that going forward, which is obviously an amazing sign of where he's at. But I think when I saw him and talked to him, you know, he is struggling with missing out on so much of his life. You know, he does wish he was a younger man. He wish he was more capable and things like that. So that's always going to be a struggle and a tension for him. But I wouldn't say it bothers him, if I'm being very honest, or at least he doesn't let it outwardly show that it bothers him. And yeah, like Andrew said, he's a survivor. He's the bravest person I've ever met. So it's been amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's like I mean, I've worked with hundreds of survivors as well over the last 10 years, and I'm always humbled and inspired by the resilience of being through what they've been through and then coming out of that. Survivor is an apt word for it. Andrew, I wanted to come a couple of questions for you. One around what support and information did you receive from the local authority, and how can local authorities better support your work?
No, with this specific investigation, we went through quite a lot just to get in the picture, really, to find out last contacts. So no issues with it at all. I think a lot local authorities now, a lot of the heads of the function, they all cascade the modern slavery training. They have modern slavery champions, and it's getting there. It isn't perfect, but I don't think it ever will be. We just need to keep pushing this out of these type of examples on what the signs are, and make sure the right people are trained frontline professional. But yeah, local authority were very good on this case. And
sort of a question around you spoke about the challenge of meeting the threshold for a modern slavery prosecution. Somebody just wanted to know what can we do to sort of address this? Is there anything that more can be done to help meet that threshold?
No, I think, like I said, it's fairly new legislation. I deal with forced labour, compulsory labour, and there are, from the Palermo Protocol to case files, are setting the case law as we go along. The issue I find difficult at times, both to find evidence and get to prosecution, is that line between, yes, the case law may say if you can physically change your environment or where you are not a victim, but then gives conditions, well, please take into account accommodation, vulnerabilities, etc. So that bar's set there, and we know, the door's not locked. You can walk outside, you can walk down the shop, you can go to the pub, but that isn't the full story. That isn't on itself. It's too one-dimensional. Of course, he's not manacled to anywhere. He can walk, but the conditions should be taken more accountable. We evidence those other mitigating circumstances that are given in case law and in legislation, but we should I think, maybe work harder to evidence them. As when I said back to the shed, that's the start of an inquiry. It's the start of an investigation. You need to evidence the points to prove. And it is difficult, but it's a new offence. And there are lots of other offences which are equally as difficult to do, which have been in legislation for many years. So, well, again, we just need to keep pushing it. We need to keep taking prosecutions to CPS. CPS need to keep taking prosecutions to trial. But one thing about this, the work I do on the last 5 or 6 years, is how very joint working everybody is, because everybody now realizes that we can't do it on our own. We need everybody to do it. So I'm saddened by this case, but I'm in a good place with regards to what we're doing from my side of enforcement, and certainly the GLAA, and moving forward to do what we do the best way we can.
Amazing. And Ed, question to you: how can, I mean, this Chris's case and the media and the sentencing and the issues around that, and then this meeting today evidencing that there's momentum behind this issue of modern slavery off the back of this case. Somebody's asking, how can we keep this momentum going so that we can continue to affect change?
I think it's true that that's so important, and I think to me, kind of the reason, if you like, that today's event's happening is because actually we want to make sure that awareness is raised, and I think probably the first thing that needs to happen alongside raising awareness is that sense that actually we've got to realize that modern slavery connects to our lives. That actually, I think because nowadays, you know, it's very easy to think this doesn't happen in the UK, even though I know that, you know, many people on this call will know actually it's in its hundreds of that, you know, kind of over 130,000 individuals who are believed to be, you know, kind of exploited and victims of modern slavery today. And I think it's easy for us to think it doesn't, you know, it's not where we live, but it is. And so I think that importance of just there being that real kind of connection moment, I suppose a penny drop moment where we realize just how close this is to all of us. And I think it's from there that conversations happen. And I think alongside that, so I think there's a very personal, human level for each one of us that we need to engage on here. But I am encouraged as well. You know, City Hearts was part of writing to the Attorney General, you know, to ask for the sentencing in the case of Chris to be, you know, to be revisited and to go to the Court of Appeal. And so I think really it's on organisational levels, you know, it's businesses taking a long look at what they're doing and their supply chains as well. So, but I think it starts on that real personal, you know, personal level.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thanks so much to Kyle, to Andrew, and to Ed and Dame Sarah for being here and answering questions and sharing some of behind the scenes. And just looking at the chat, thanks so much for everybody on the call engaging and sharing thoughts and opinions. And this case has stirred momentum, and there's plenty of action points out of today to get your teeth into. And feel free to email City Hearts info@cityhearts.co.uk if you have any more questions, if you want some more information. But thanks for giving up your lunchtime to be here, and we really appreciate it, and we hope you have a great rest of the day, and please do be in contact if we can help or if you need any more information. But thank you so much for being here and for caring about people like Chris and the support and the journey that they're on to recovery. Thank you very much.